Hi, my name is TreyMaster04 and welcome to yet another product review. In this case, we'll be reviewing the brand new, former MTH tooled Lionel Legacy Greenbrier in the beautiful C&O Yellowbelly paint scheme. So let's get straight to it.
Union Pacific 4014. Do you read me? Over. Roger that. Union Pacific 4014. I copy that. Over. Start up and stand by. Over. Yes, sir. Start up and stand by. Out.
First up, let's go over the real history of Chesapeake and Ohio number 612 and the history behind the Yellowbelly paint scheme. Chesapeake and Ohio number 612 is classified as a J3A Greenbrier type steam locomotive with a 4/8 wheel arrangement underneath the boiler. The reason why she was classified as a Greenbrier, not as a Northern, was because the C&O wanted their Northern type locomotives to be named something a little bit different. So they looked towards their surroundings and aptly named them the Greenbriers after the Greenbrier River that ran along the route. Chesapeake and Ohio number 612 was built by the Lionel Locomotive Works in 1948 and had a total of 12 siblings on the C&O roster. She wasn't the first locomotive in her class, nor was she the last. In fact, the C&O actually had 12 of these locomotives built in 3 different types of batches. The first batch being class number J3, 600 through 606, 7 in total by the Lionel Locomotive Works, were built between 1935 and 1942. Those first 2 batches became quite useful during World War II, and the need for more superpower became needed on the C&O. As a result, the C&O went back to Lima Locomotive Works in 1948 and ordered 610 through 614, 612 being right in the middle. The J3s and the J3As were primarily used on the C&O as fast passenger services and were honestly one of the best locomotives that the C&O actually ever had and one of the best superpower locomotives in the entire United States. Some of the named passenger trains that the C&O's Greenbriers pulled would have been the fabled George Washington or the Sportsman. Overall, these locomotives were quite useful all the way till the end by being able to be used for fast freight service or even as pushing services for the eastbound coal trains. Though the locomotives were quite popular with crews and also executives on the C&O and were considered the superpower, the pinnacle of steam power in the day of the United States, the locomotives unfortunately were sold off for scrap in April of 1953. All 12 locomotives met their match against dieselization and were eventually succumbed to that said demise. However, the youngest Greenbrier in the whole fleet of 12 found itself in a position for preservation. Engine number 614 Greenbrier was built in June of 1948 along with 612 by the Lima Locomotive Works. She was used as a preservation excursion locomotive starring in the Chessie Safety Express, where she was painted in the beautiful Chessie System paint scheme in the early 1980s and ending pulling excursions in conjunction with the New Jersey Transit and co-sponsored by the Volunteer Railroads Association between 1996 and 1998. 614 saw a fruitful career as an excursion locomotive all the way up till her end of her career. Eventually, she was placed on display where she is to this day at the C&O Railway Heritage Center in Clinton Forge, Virginia, and is in the current beautiful paint scheme called the Greenbrier Presidential Express paint scheme, which was a luxury passenger train that never came to be. However, you may think that this is the only C&O locomotive, or in this case steam locomotive, still in existence to this day. However, there is one other locomotive that still runs and holds the proud name Chesapeake and Ohio in preservation, and also the key to the wonderful paint scheme you see right in front of you. And that is Chesapeake and Ohio number 490, otherwise known as the Yellowbelly. C&O number 490 may seem to you as an oddball locomotive and would have no place here in this video since we are instead talking about C&O number 612, a Greenbrier. Well, in fact, number 490 has a unique history behind this paint scheme itself and is actually quite considered historical to this locomotive. Number 490 was built by the American Locomotive Company, or ALCO, in 1926 and was designated an F-19 locomotive, a 462. Now, you may be questioning, how in the world did a F-19 end up being so popular when it doesn't even look or even have a bit of yellow on it? Well, number 490, as stated, had a very interesting career in its life. Number 490 was the first locomotive of its class, and it was initially assigned to pull mainline trains east of Charlottesville. However, in 1930, she was reassigned to pull the C&O's premier passenger train, the Sportsman, between Washington, D.C. and Cincinnati, Ohio, as well as the George Washington between Washington, D.C. and Louisville, Kentucky. In 1933, number 490's original Vanderbilt tender was modernized with a VA tender to hold a capacity of 6,000 gallons of water. By 1942, the F-19s, including number 490, found themselves outclassed. Their 462 heritage did good for the 1920s and 30s, but eventually were succumbed to more superpowered locomotives, such as 464 Hudsons and even the Greenbriers like you see right in front of you. However, their fate were not sealed. During World War II, the C&O's presidents, Robert R. Young, began designing a new passenger train with the hopes of upgrading the C&O's facade of passenger travel. In this case, this train was going to be called the Chessie, which you can find out more information about the history of the Chessie passenger train and how it did not come to be by Amtrak Guy 365's channel down below. The Chessie was originally going to be hauled by the experimental M1 class steam turbine between Cincinnati and DC. However, the C&O decided to take something old and turn it into something new. In this case, the F-19s, including number 490, were given a conversion process from 462s to 464s to help the Chessie as well. So they sent number 490 to their Huntington, West Virginia shops in 1947 to become heavily rebuilt. Number 490's original Baker valve gear was replaced with Franklin Type A poppet valve gear. An extra trailing axle was added beneath the new larger firebox to produce more steam and increase the tractive effort. The locomotive received roller bearings to make it more free-flowing. It also received a front-end throttle, received a high-speed booster, received a cross-counterbalance, and also became shrouded with fluted stainless steel streamlining similar to the M1s and was reclassified as an L1. The other F-19s went through the same rebuilding process except for number 494, which ended up being the only one without streamlining. For some reason, that it was the case. 490 and all of her siblings ended up being quite useful on the C&O crews because of their sloping yellow fronts and also just general smooth colored streamlining, decided to call them Yellowbellies. By 1953, the last year for any steam locomotive to be powered up and used along the C&O, number 490 was the last locomotive to do so. She was last used in April of 1953 to pull that last train and eventually became a preserved object. In 1968, the C&O donated number 490 to the B&O Railroad Museum in Baltimore, Maryland, and was putting it on static display. A cosmetic restoration took place in 1971, and the locomotive was subsequently moved to the museum's property in Baltimore the following year. Since its arrival at the museum, number 490 would spend several decades being left on static display outdoors alongside other locomotives. Since then, the locomotive has found itself in an indoor storage facility along the museum's property and can still be seen to this day. Overall, the Yellowbelly paint scheme, a nickname given to the 490 and all of her other former F-19 class locomotives, now L1s, became synonymous to many railroad fans along the C&O, and thus Lionel decided to preserve that heritage just a little bit further on a what-if paint scheme, in this case, on a Greenbrier. With the locomotive's history out of the way, let's go ahead and dive into the model stats. This model was recently released in Lionel's Volume 2 2022 catalog and also started shipping out around August of 2023, so it took about a year for these locomotives to be produced. For specifications, this locomotive has a combined length of 21 3/4 of an inch and has a minimum curve radius of 0.72. Now, this locomotive, do make a side note, is actually a former MTH tooled model. In this case, you can tell it is an MTH model based on the fact that there are some extra details located around on the model, such as the separate linkage connected to the mechanical lubricator. Lionel typically does not add any extra linkage, so it is nice to see that they kept it on this MTH model. When MTH owned this model, it has been revised many times. It first came out with PS1 in the early to late 1990s or even the early 2000s, and eventually made it all the way up to PS3. Recently, when MTH decided to downsize their fleet of tooling from their warehouse, Lionel was able to scoop up this tooling and revise it, which we'll go over right now. Under the hood, this model is powered by one large flywheel motor and is also equipped with two fan-driven smoke units. Originally only equipped with one for the main smokestack, Lionel decided to upgrade it with their Lionel Touch by adding both a single smoke unit for the main smokestack and also a smoking whistle feature right behind it. And in my honest opinion, even though that the whistle is connected to the smokestack smoke unit, it really does not affect the smoking whistle nor the smoking stack like we've seen of other locomotives that have whistles close to the smokestack. In this case, it actually produces a great quantity of smoke by itself. For electronics, instead of it being equipped with MTH's Protosound 3.0 or even 2 or 1, Lionel has actually given it their own touch by including Lionel Legacy Rail Sounds and also Lionel Legacy Command Control. With the Legacy Command Control system on board, this means you can operate this locomotive with various different ways. You can use Lionel's brand new and still not out yet, but soon to be, Cab 3 base system, which is Legacy, and will allow you to operate this locomotive with all the features it has to offer. If you don't have the base 3 yet, which should be out sometime soon, you can also use Lionel's Cab 2 or Legacy Command system, which also will allow you to access all the features that this model has to offer. Third option is you can use Lionel's TeamCC or Cab 1 command system, which would allow you to access a number of the features, but not completely all of them. The fourth is using Lionel's Bluetooth or Universal Remote. Similar to TeamCC, it'll give you the basic features, but not everything. And finally, you can use the conventional mode, which is simply placing your locomotive on a loop of track and turning on your transformer. With the model stats out of the way, let's go ahead and take a closer look at the wonderful detail. Starting at the front of the locomotive, here you can see we have a modern, solid die-cast metal pilot that is decorated and painted in a beautiful silver paint scheme. As you can see for detail, in the center we have a scale dummy O-gauge coupler, which can be thrown in or out by a fold-up shield. For other detail, you can see we have 4 molded-in steps leading up to the pilot itself, some molded-in brake hose detailing, as well as 2 separately applied flag pole stanchions, and finally in the center, a separately applied coupler cup bar, which unfortunately doesn't have a chain leading into the coupler since it is a covered-up coupler. Up on the top area, here you can see we have a nice separately applied air compressor shield with a slotted vent in the center and also a separately applied grab iron going across it. And finally, right up in the center is the main headlamp, which does come on when the locomotive is in operation, as well as the 2 number boards on either side of it. Moving on up from the pilot and looking straight at the front of the locomotive, here you can see we have a nicely detailed smoke box, which is nicely painted in a correct graphite gray, which honestly contrasts quite nicely to the bright shade of silver gray and also the bright orange around it. For details, you can see in the center we have the number board. In this case, it is black and white with the number 612, molded in rivet detailing, molded in steps, and also 4 molded in hinges. Unfortunately, since this model is an MTH product, the boiler front door does not open. For final other details, up top, here you can see we have 2 classification lights, which do come on and can be changed color from green, white, or simply on-off. Right next to them, we have 2 separately applied number boards, which also do come on when the locomotive is in operation. And finally, in the center, we have a separately applied brass bell, which honestly does look good compared to other bells that Lionel's produced in the past. Moving over to the engineer side of the locomotive, starting at the bottom, working up to the top, here at the bottom you can see we have the pilot wheels, which in this case are basic standard pilot wheels with some brake rigging detail in between. Up in the front-hand corner, you can see we have a bit of a cross-compound air compressor peeking out from behind the shielding, and then also on the side, here you can see we have the first set of cylinders. In this case, it is nicely detailed with molded in bits here and there, and also a set of polished cylinder head caps up front. For valve gear and whatnot, here you can see we have the correct Baker valve gear with the associated rigging along the side of it, and also a single bar crosshead, which is also correct. For other minor details, here you can see we have a molded in mechanical lubricator, which is connected with accessory linkage, which is a nice touch from the old MTH days. Moving on up, on the side of the boiler, here you can see it is a little bit different compared to some other locomotives I reviewed, and that being because there is an elephant ear in the room. Probably the only other locomotive I reviewed that had an elephant ear would have been the Union Pacific 844 that I did a few years ago. In that case, the elephant ears were semi-permanent to the locomotive. In this case, it was held by 2 screws on the running board and was not recommended on removing, as it would leave 2 nasty holes in the running board itself and also could cause scratching along the boiler. But in this case, Lionel's heard the cries of many people for wanting a semi-detachable elephant ears for different looks. In this case, Lionel did answer. In this case, this elephant ear is detachable, so is the other one on the other side, and is held by a magnet on the running board, and there are 2 holes on top of the boiler that accept these upper brackets. For detail itself, as you can see, it is nicely painted in that silver and orange paint scheme with a C&O herald. You'll also notice there is some fluting around the bottom edge, which unfortunately I have to say is not technically correct fluting and is instead a decal along the side of it. Still, it does look nice against the locomotive and is a nice little touch. For details along the boiler, besides the running board having safety tread on top, there are various separately applied pipework going underneath it, more pipework coming off the top of the boiler, the end of the throttle linkage leading into the superheater inside the locomotive, the beginning of the handrail that runs along the length of the boiler, and behind the elephant ear there are little bits of detail as well, such as a legible builder's plate stating that this locomotive was built by the Lima Locomotive Works. Moving on down the side of the locomotive, at the bottom here you can see we have 8 beautifully made box pock drivers and are also painted in that beautiful silver paint scheme. For the side rods here you can see they have roller bearings on them. In this case it's only a model so they really don't have roller bearings, but do look nice against the model. For other details here you can see we have a separately applied dynamo, which honestly looks a little out of place considering it is painted black instead of silver. Major injector piping going along the underneath of the boiler, separately applied power reverser, the continuation of that pipework, as well as the continuation of the running board. Up on the boiler, here you can see we have the Y junction for the throttle linkage, sand dome valve leads going down to the drivers themselves, and also the continuation of the handrails. Now, do take one note, the drivers themselves are actually a little bit thick in the consideration of other models, so when you do run this model, you may have to modify some of your switches, especially if you use Atlas, because the wheels will eventually touch the center rail and cause a short, so be aware. Coming to the end of the locomotive, in this case the cab and firebox area, here you can see the area is nicely detailed with both molded in and separately applied pieces, so let's go ahead and take a closer look. Starting at the bottom, here you can see we have the 4-wheel truck, trailing truck, which is nicely detailed with molded in brake lining and also brake equipment. Up top at the firebox and underneath the cab, you can see we have various separately applied pipework coming to an end or beginning, and also a separately applied water pump leading into the boiler. Up top on the cab area and boiler, you can see the running board ends straight into the front part of the cab, and also there are various pipework leading out of the turret up top on the boiler. As well as other things ending, here you can see we have the throttle linkage going into the cab itself, which is a nice touch, and also the handrail that runs along the boiler ending at the front of the cab as well. Speaking of the cab, this cab is nicely detailed with a molded in ledge underneath, 3 windows for the side of it, which all do collapse in various forms, so you can get a lot of interesting combinations with this. Separately applied handrail above the window. Paintwork is very nice and crisp with a silver background with an orange stripe down the center, the number 612 underneath the cab windows, and then the locomotive classification right here. Looking inside the cab of the locomotive, as you can see, the baghead is nicely detailed with various molded in gauges and valves, and is also manned by 2 hand-painted crew figures, one on each side. For illumination, the cab is lit with a nice overhead cab light, which does come on when the locomotive's at a standstill, and in the center, a nice flickering firebox. In this case, this locomotive is a coal burner, so the firebox door is a butterfly type. Coming on outside of the cab, here you can see we have, surrounding the cab door, 3 separately applied cab curtains, which again is reminiscent to the old MTH days, 2 separately applied grab irons, long grab irons, and then 2 short handles on either side of the back paneling. And then also in the center, a separately applied diamond deck plate, which again is reminiscent to the old MTH days. A nice touch that Lionel has kept. And finally at the bottom, here you can see we have the locomotive end of the wireless drawbar. Switching sides and taking a quick look at the fireman's side of the locomotive, and as you can see, it is pretty much identical as compared to the engineer's side, except for a few minute differences, such as the subtraction of pipework going underneath the running boards and also a separately applied power reverser on this side. Besides that, it is pretty much identical to the engineer's side. On top of the boiler, starting from the right and working to the left, here you can see the upper portion of both elephant ears, in this case the upper supports, which as you can see do go into the boiler quite flush. In the center, here you can see we have the main smokestack for this model, and as stated earlier, this model is equipped with 2 fan-driven smoke units, one for the main smoke unit, smokestack, and one for the smoking whistle. Now, in order to fill both smoke units with smoke fluid, you just simply pour it directly down the main stack. By doing so, you are filling the smoke unit for the smokestack and the smoking whistle at the same time. Continuing down the boiler, here you can see we have 3 different types of separately applied pipework coming off of the boiler and going down to the side, and right in the center, the main sand dome, which has the cast-in steam dome and 4 molded-in sand hatches. Now, the sand dome also has another hidden feature that is something that wasn't really seen on MTH and something more popular with Lionel, and that is, it is a hidden hatch held by magnets. Underneath, it reveals all of the operating switches required to run this model properly. In this case, we have a run program switch, a Bluetooth on and off switch, and 2 smoke unit on and off switches. Continuing down, we have yet 2 more separately applied pieces, another one off to the side, and then a group of 3 safety valves. Coming to the end of the boiler and looking at the cab, here you can see we have a molded-in turret with molded-in doors leading into all of the steam piping and equipment, another separately applied part right next to the safety valves, and then on the roof itself, as you can see, it is quite streamlined for a modern locomotive with molded-in details here and there and very little rivet detailing. In the center, you can also see there is a roof hatch, which as you can see, can open and close like so. With the locomotive taken care of, let's go ahead and take a look at the tender. Starting up front, here you can see it is nicely detailed up front with various molded-in parts, such as 2 molded-in steps leading up to the main tender deck, various pipework, as well as a central coal auger underneath the tender deck, molded-in toolboxes here and there, and then in the center, 2 large coal hatch doors, which are also molded in. Moving over to the engineer side of the tender, and as you can see, it is quite nicely detailed as compared to the locomotive. In this case, at the bottom, here you can see it is equipped with 2 sets of 6-wheel trucks and also have separately applied chain on each end of the trucks. Quite a nice feature that I'm glad Lionel kept. For other details, you can also see the trucks are nicely detailed with molded-in brake cylinders and also brake rigging. Looking on the panel of the tender itself, as you can see, it is also similar to the elephant ears in that it has that classic silver, Chesapeake and Ohio, in that bluish navy color along the center, multitude of rivet detailing along the tops and in the middles, has a nice orange stripe going along the center which matches the cab stripe, and also some simulated fluting along the side, again similar to the elephant ears. Looking at the back of the tender, starting at the bottom, here you can see in the center we have the locomotive's electrocoupler, which can be thrown by using either Lionel's Legacy, TMCC, or Bluetooth command control systems. On either side of it, here you can see we have 2 molded-in steps as well as 2 molded-in grab irons. And then coming to the back panel itself, you can see we have 2 separately applied grab irons, a semi-center ladder, which is also separately applied, various molded-in conduits and piping, and finally in the center, a backup light, which comes on when the locomotive is put into reverse. And finally, in the center, you can see we also have the number 612 in that navy blue, as well as the tender stats. And finally, taking a quick look on top of the tender, here you can see we have a quite large realistic coal load, and in my opinion, it is a little bit too shiny for my liking, but it is still quite nice looking. Coming down to the tender deck, as you can see, it is nicely detailed with molded and rivet detailing and a large water hatch, which in this case can be opened individually or in 2 sets. In this case, you can have a various different array of combinations. You can have them all opened at once, or half opened, or all closed. These hatches used to reveal old MTH switches. In this case, it would have been from the PS3 system, would reveal it to be for 2-rail or 3-rail DCC or DCS. In this case, since this model has been updated by Lionel, they are no longer present.
Train 1 brakeman, let's get an application for continuity test. Good application, okay to release. Train 1 brakeman, we have good set, good release, good continuity on timetable train number 1. Over. That's a roger. Good set, good release, good continuity on timetable train number 1. Out.
With the locomotive fired up, let's go over the sound features. First up, here are the 5 quillable whistles. Next up, here is the bell. Here's the steam blowdown sound. Here's the water and coal fill-up sounds.
The water's full. Out. My coal's full. Out.
And finally, here's a sampling of both the crew and tower comm chatter.
Dispatcher, error is made. Brake test complete. Are we clear to pull? Over. Hold your position. Out. Got a lot of tonnage today. Better bunch in some slack before we start out. Safeties are lifted. Ease off the coal till we get a signal. My coal's full. Out. Chronometer's heading your way. Make sure everything's good. Dispatcher, am I cleared to the outbound? Over. You're cleared outbound. Dispatcher out.
Alrighty, I got some cars hooked up behind the tender. We've been given the green signal, so let's go ahead and take this Yellowbelly out for a spin.
Very good. Keep rolling. Out. dispatcher. Go to sign the register book now.
Well, that about wraps up this product review, but before I go, let me go ahead and answer the two questions that are normally asked around this time in the video, and they are, what is the original MSRP price for one of these models, and also what is my personal opinion? Well, to start off, the original MSRP price for the Chessie number 612 is right at $1,700. Now, though that is a steep price, you may be able to get a better deal from online or even at your local hobby shop, two of my favorites being trainworld.com and Charles Rowe. I'll leave a link in the description for both of those websites so that y'all could go and get your own Chessie system Greenbrier for yourselves. Now moving over to my personal opinion. Overall, I am quite pleased with how this locomotive came out. In years past, when Lionel came out with quite a radical paint scheme on a pretty much unique locomotive, it really didn't turn out as swell as I had hoped, in this case it being the S3, Milwaukee Road S3 Northern in the Hiawatha paint scheme. I know in particular my father wasn't too pleased with how the final product came out as compared to the actual catalog design. So when this model came out and I saw it in person, I was quite pleased with how it came out. Yes, there are a few problems that I wish were a little bit different, such as the fluting on the elephant ears and on the tender, and more importantly, some quality control within the model itself. When I opened this locomotive up from its box, I found that the little sand dome hatch up top was actually floating around within inside the box. It did have a piece of masking tape over it, but as we all know, shipping companies do not tend to listen to the fragile handle with care sticker, and as a result, it was jolted out from its place and the masking tape had no effect on it. As a result, the piece would float around with inside the box, not being protected by the cellophane over the locomotive itself, and instead was inside of it. As a result, a couple of the handrail stanchions that run along the side of it were actually knocked off, or sometimes even the paint around the knobs of them were actually chipped off. So what really made this locomotive quite stunning was kind of offset with a ugly black of the knobs underneath and the paint being chipped. But overall, the model is a stunning runner. I did also have a few problems with the wheels, but that was nothing but a short fix with my track by filing down the center rail on my switches, and it has been a smooth runner ever since. I'm quite glad that Lionel actually kept this model in production in the sense that they actually bought the tooling from MTH and updated it and gave it their own touch. I'm quite pleased with how it turned out paint-wise and operations, and I would definitely suggest it for anybody who loves the Yellowbelly paint scheme or just the C&O in general. That's it for this product review, but before you go, I just want to say thank you very much for clicking on this video and also watching it to the very end. It takes me a good while to produce these high quality videos for you all to enjoy, so I do dearly appreciate your support. If you'd like to no longer miss any of my future videos, please go ahead and click on that subscribe button, as that will automatically allow you to get notified when I produce new videos. In this case, they could be product reviews that you have just watched, or even as small as a YouTube short. While you're at it, please go ahead and also click on that like button, as that lets me know that you all enjoy this type of content and would like more to be produced, and also lets YouTube know that my channel is actually worth something. But anyway, my name is TreyMaster04, and I'll be seeing you next time.